Okay, everybody. Well, I want to welcome you to our session tonight, our Community Connections Town Hall, where tonight I'm very proud and excited to be focusing on our Indigenous roots here in Western Irondequoit. And we have a wonderful panel of Indigenous people who are going to share from the first person some of their experience and insight to help us in our learning and development. But before I do so, I start tonight with a heavy heart, and being very honest, I question whether or not we should move forward with tonight's session in light of the 15 very innocent people who died tragically today in the school shooting of Robb Elementary School, and also in light of the recent shootings in the racist act in Buffalo, New York. But I think it's important for us to move forward because this is exactly the work that we need to do to help to combat acts like that and to help us to heal and to recognize the good and the value and the connectivity between us just in the world and in society. So with that, we're going to move forward. But before we do, I do want to respect those who tragically lost their lives, the people, the family members and friends that were impacted, and certainly the communities and all of us. So if we could take a moment of silence, please, in honor of them. Thank you. So I've been in the district for a little over 3 years, and just getting to know Irondequoit before I came on board, and then learning very quickly when I did, recognizing again those rich Indigenous roots here locally and certainly at the state level. We set a path forward to continue our development as a school and as a community. And one of the major steps that we've made here in the last couple of years was to create a land acknowledgement to honor and recognize the heritage that we share. And so this is something that the Board of Education approved a little over a year ago. And we now read it before all of our significant events in the district, and it's posted in all of our buildings. So I'm going to start with that tonight. So our land acknowledgement here is: the Western Irondequoit Central School District acknowledges the Indigenous people of this region, and that this school district building sits on the homelands of the Onödowága of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. It is on these lands that we teach, learn, and live. So with that, I want to really quickly just recognize a subcommittee that we jump-started, again, about a year ago, part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the district. And we fall underneath our coalition that we created in the district. And this is an Indigenous Peoples Subcommittee. And again, some of those members are here live on the panel with us tonight, and others are joining us as part of the audience. But I just want to recognize them and call attention to all the work that they've done, their commitment to, again, calling attention to Indigenous people and combating some of the erasure that's happened over time relative to that. So with that, Courtney Schaus is going to be our facilitator tonight. Brian Bushart is going to be introducing folks. Rosa Vargas Cronin, also a board member here, is going to say some words via video. Tiffany Archibald is a teacher in the district. She's a member of the committee. Maria Benke, she is a teacher and a lead teacher in one of our buildings, two of our buildings, and she's with us here tonight. Kevin Cathy, community member, and Kimberly Crystal, administrator in the district. So I just want to thank them for their work. And within the last month, we together coordinated, and with the approval of Board of Education, a flag raising of the Haudenosaunee flag here in the district that will now fly permanently and very proudly within the district moving forward. I just want to thank Mr. Garrow, and I know I saw Ms. Vidali's on in the audience tonight, and other members that graciously donated that flag to the district to help to move us forward with that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney Schaus, who was a recently elected Board of Education member, going to be starting in July, and just welcome her and take it away, Courtney.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank you all of our panelists and our subcommittee members and audience members. So as you heard in our land acknowledgement, our district in Monroe County is settled on the ancestral land of the Onödowága, which is one of the nations under the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, along with the Cayuga, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, and Tuscarora. And the reason that we regularly make this acknowledgement is to offer our respect and open doors for listening and discourse for programming like tonight. We are still here lifting the veil of invisibility of Indigenous peoples and celebrating Indigenous culture and contributions. So with that, if you do have any questions or comments, please post them in the Q&A and we will post an answer in there, or we'll answer it live. And tonight's programming, we're going to start with a video speech from Rosa Vargas Cronin. She is one of our members, and she could not be here tonight, but did want to send us this message.
And Board of Education member. And I'm so excited to be a part of this committee. When recruitment began for this committee, I really wanted to make sure that all Indigenous people were represented. Especially the Indigenous people from our community. When asked what ethnic group I identify with, I've changed my response many times within my lifespan. As a child, I identified as Hispanic because I was taught to embrace my Spanish roots and celebrate the colonists who literally ripped my country apart. My parents are children of the Trujillo dictatorship, and later the Balaguer era. From the 1930s to this day, Spanish, French, British, and US forces have colluded with the government of the Dominican Republic to institutionalize anti-Haitianism, Negrophobia, and anti-Blackness. We were taught to glorify white supremacy, expansionism, and Hispanophilia fully. A few years ago, my husband gifted me a 23andMe genetics kit. It was so freeing to see my genetic makeup, to really understand my ancestry. I learned I was made up of 12% Nigerian, 20% Congolese, and Southern East African, 20% Angolan, and 10% Senegambian. It was so amazing to study and research my people and the civilizations that ruled over a millennia before European colonization and the slave trade. We were united as a people under a series of powerful empires. I knew I was African. I also have 37% Spanish and Portuguese, but I refuse to identify by my colonizers. I refuse to glorify the men who wiped out the Taino people and began the transatlantic slave trade. Being 5% Taino bears a lot more weight for me. The Taino people were the principal ethnic group and culture who had the misfortune of greeting Columbus and his ships. They thrived in the Bahamas and all of the Greater Antilles except Western Cuba. Taino means good or noble. Like the Haudenosaunee, Tainos represented different nations, mostly depending on geographical locations. There were classic Tainos, Western and Eastern Tainos. There were also made up of matriarch societies that blossomed when they appointed chieftains that we called caciques. The Tainos also had a ball game played on a large outdoor field. They had a love for the land and all those who inhabited it. They believed in the connection between the earth, mind, body, and spirit. Today, I proudly identify as Afro-Caribbean because that 62% counts for all of who I am.
Thank you. And although she can't be here with us, Rosa did want us to hear what she had to say. And so with that, we are going to turn over the mic, as it were, to Ron Garrow, who is going to give us the Thanksgiving address for tonight's program. Ron is Akwesasne Mohawk and Bear Clan.
Ego seguego lailundi unyats Ganondagan Akwesasne Mohawk Max Kalevake Wakunula Ohon Karawatako Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Guerrero Sua Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Yatenesta Onjo Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Genjo Sua Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Onegano Sua Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Otala Sua Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagate Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Ohende Sua Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagate Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Ogale Dalun Salonto Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Ogale Soa Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagate Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Ogistoka Soa Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Ojidan Ogunga Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Lateweras Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Oji Stokwasuma Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Gondirio Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Tinu Lavane Yete Sata Satanaka Galakwa Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Chirwanu Lavane Galakwa Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura Onagates Kanagura de Chirwanu Lavane Sumbuyadiso Atoni Tuakne Ungonagura. Now, so that's the Ahoden Garawatekwa. Those are the words that are said before all words are said. They open an address. That is customarily how we, the Haudenosaunee, begin our meetings of importance in our ceremonies. We give our greetings and our thanks to the Mother Earth and all the living things upon it. And when we do this, we we bring our minds together as one, because the words I've spoken are universal truths. So for one moment in time, all of us have got to have, we are all in agreement and we are all in a good mind. So that's why we say Atonio Tuakne Ungunagura, and now our minds are one. And it's a good thing that it's this lesson that was brought to us by the great peacemaker who landed there in Irondequoit and began his journey there. And it is something that we use to clear our minds and bring our minds together. And because throughout this meeting, maybe our minds may become clouded and we may not all agree on something that happens. But at least in the beginning, right now, we can begin in a good place. And now our minds are one. Now.
Thank you very much, Ron. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Brian, who is going to give a brief introduction of all of our panelists before we begin.
Thank you. So our first panelist is Ronald Garrow of the Akwesasne Mohawk Bear Clan. He's the founder and executive director of the Indigenous Peoples Center in Rochester, New York, a nonprofit organization supporting and promoting awareness of the Indigenous peoples culture, primarily the Haudenosaunee culture. Ron grew up in the Akwesasne Indian Reservation of upstate New York and is a Mohawk language speaker. Ron has worked with many individuals and local entities through speaking engagements, interviews, and public events to bring positive change and celebrate the Indigenous cultures that are present in the region. Thank you for your leadership, Ron, and thank you for joining us. Ronnie Garrow of the Akwesasne Mohawk is a graduate of Irondequoit High School, where he played football and earned all-county accolades and was the team's co-most valuable player. He was recognized as an all-star for lacrosse as well. Currently, Ronnie attends SUNY Morrisville and is majoring in applied psychology. Thank you for being here, Ronnie. Third is Trish Corcoran of the Tonawanda, Onödowága. She is a mother of two and a teacher at the Harley School, where she is also the designer of their native pollinator garden. She is a steward for the Harley Wildwood and recently organized the planting of over 100 trees by students K through 12. Trish is proud of her work with Remnants, an interdisciplinary performance and creative conversation about Indigenous histories and embodied roots. Her writings about her family have been performed as part of the Fringe Festival at the University of Rochester and this August at the Memorial Art Gallery. It is her honor to serve on the Indigenous Peoples Day Planning Committee and the Tonawanda Historical Society. And it is our honor to have you here tonight, Trish. Catherine Shutt is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, one of the 6 nations under the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Catherine grew up in Liverpool, New York, outside of Syracuse, and now she lives in Irondequoit with her husband and 2 sons. She is a 6th grade teacher in the Rush-Henrietta Central School District, and she is also a member of our Indigenous Peoples DEI Subcommittee here in Irondequoit. Catherine enjoys spending time with family and friends. She volunteers with Honor Flight Rochester and spends a great deal of time watching both of her boys play volleyball. We appreciate your insight, Catherine, and thank you for joining us tonight. And finally, we have Ansley Jemison of the Seneca Wolf Clan. He is a cultural liaison for Ganondagan State Historic Site, a Native American historic site in Ontario County, New York. Ansley also hosts the Indigenous Peoples Podcast, an Indigenous Peoples themed podcast that highlights contemporary Indigenous peoples' lives. Ansley was Residence Hall Director of the American Indian and Indigenous Studies Program House at Cornell University and former Executive Director of the Iroquois Nationals. We are grateful for your time, Ansley, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so to start off our program tonight, focused on lifting the veil of invisibility of Indigenous peoples and celebrating Indigenous culture and contributions, we are turning it over to Ron Garrow to get us started.
Hello, everyone. The introduction I did in Mohawk. I introduced myself, and they already introduced me again. But you know, Ron Garrow, Akwesasne Mohawk. I think I'll start off by saying what I think got us here and put us in this direction, and the committee, and what caused the committee to form and such. It started several years ago. One day at a basketball game in Irondequoit with my son. He was sitting over in the student section. I was sitting in with the parents, and my son Ronnie, who's on the panel here, came across the gymnasium during the basketball game to to ask me for money for something to drink or something like that. And he got halfway through the gym, and he's in the middle of the gym floor, and the student section called his name and started making these stereotypical Indian war whoop noises, and it was directed directly at him. And I thought that was really upsetting, and that he's that he had to go through that. And there's hundreds of people there, and news cameras were there because it was during the state run for the school basketball team. And there was a bunch of students doing it and nobody did anything about it. There was no outrage, no anything. I mean, they're doing a very racist act. And my son's, the victim of this racism. So I brought it to the attention of some people on staff. I went to the security and I told them what was going on, and they didn't really seem to care. They were like, well, what do they do? Like, so what? And I said, well, I don't remember what my exact words were because it was several years ago, but I was like, blatant racism is going on over here. Why isn't anybody doing anything about it? And they said, well, what did they do? And I told them, and he was like, well, and they're like, so what? Which is where, the term invisibility comes in. When racism occurs towards Indigenous people, it doesn't seem to have the same effect or anybody even seems to care. And that was my observation because nobody said anything. So I asked to speak to I was like, well, who else is here that I could talk to? And they said, well, the athletic director's right over there. And I mentioned it to her, and she said, basically the same thing they said. It's like, well, we'll tell them, not to do that anymore. It's like, but at the same time, where is the outrage? Why isn't anybody upset about this? That racism is occurring, towards one of the students in this school, and nobody is saying anything. Nobody cares. What is going on with that? And it was really, really upsetting to me. And so then after the game, we left, and I'm talking to my son. I said, did that make you upset when they did that to you? When they were doing that? And he said, no, they do it all the time. I was like, wow, that's, and I didn't say anything to him more about it really. But that's, I can't believe that happened. He says it happens all the time. So it has to happen in school, which is really concerning to me that it happens that often that he's been desensitized to it. And it also was really concerning to me that it happens in school. And if it happens that often, staff members have to see this happening. And staff members are seeing this happening and they aren't doing anything about it. Why aren't they stepping in when they see racist taunts happening? So I talked to Kathy Cassania about it, where she's in surge, and we went up to speak to the principal and we talked about it. And he said they're going to have some trainings. They're going to do some sort of I forget what the kind of training it was called, but they're going to do trainings about it, and sensitivity trainings and cultural awareness trainings and that kind of thing for some people. And so my question was, is this going to have to do with Indigenous people, or is it just Black and Hispanic? And they said, well, I believe it's Black and Hispanic. I said, well, this isn't. So I said, well, this really isn't going to address the issue of Indigenous people. And again, furthermore, more invisibility. We're doing racism training about racism, but the racism does not apply to Indigenous people. So again, even in this, we face more racism because of invisibility. And I said, well, this isn't going to handle this situation. So then we went and we said, well, they're going to talk to the students and say, well, you're going to talk to the students. That's, good. And you tell them not to do that, but are you going to tell them why they shouldn't do that? Are they going to get more training? And they said they were going to. And so we went to, a couple weeks later, we went to Mr. Crane, and we had a talk with him about the situation. And he had some thoughts on what we can do, on what the school can do. And he put it in the hands of some people. And this is how this became the forum. And that's really good. But then we were at a lacrosse game, and I seen so some of the thoughts and ideas where those generated from was, we were at a lacrosse game, and I seen somebody, one of the parents there, and they had a shirt on that said the Irondequoit Indians. And so I asked him what was going on with that, and he said, oh, yeah, it's the Irondequoit Indians. It's the name of the team. And I was like, no, this is not the name of the team. The name of the team is the Irondequoit Eagles. And he said, yeah, they changed that, but we don't really like that. We decided that we were going to. I was like, it's new. It's like a new shirt. He's like, yeah, we went and made them. He's like, you guys went and made shirts that say the Irondequoit Indians after the school board decided that that was offensive and the team needed to be changed. He's like, yeah, we don't agree with that because we are honoring the Native people when we say the Irondequoit Indians. That's great. Well, who did you ask? Did you ask any Native people if they were honored by that? And he said, he said they didn't. I said, well, if you want to honor us, why don't you ask us how we would like to be honored? It's like, if you want to honor us, why don't you do land acknowledgements before the game? Do land acknowledgements before at the beginning of every school day. Fly our flag. Teach about our change the curriculum in school. Fly the flag and teach what our flag is. And then you'll be honoring us. And so the way me and Dr. Johnson got met was, I brought this up to Mrs. Kit and told her, and she said, well, if you see one of those parents, tell me about that shirt. And I did. And she went over and she investigated and she found out about it. And then that hit social media. And they said they were going to do something like make hundreds of shirts and everybody was going to show up with a thing. And I said, what are you guys talking about? And laughing at us because Indigenous people think that it's offensive and they're going to do it anyways. And Dr. Johnson called me up about that, and about there possibly being some sort of confrontation. And I said, no, it's never my intention at any time ever for there ever to be any confrontation. I wanted to educate, and that's what my intention was. And so that began some conversations with Dr. Johnson and I shared some of the information that I shared with that gentleman that evening, and conversations began, and that's really what led up to the forming of the committee and the flying of the flag, and us coming out of invisibility. And I just hope that we can have some education around what is happening with the flag and what the flag represents, and about that. And because without that, it's just a flag up there, and we're missing an opportunity to educate not just the students but faculty, because I believe that there are faculty that don't get it and don't understand what's happening. And I think that's not totally their own fault, because the education system is what we're working on to fix, and we do suffer from invisibility. But I think I didn't get the 2-minute mark or anything, but I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for sharing. Yes. Ronnie, share some of your experiences with us, but from your mouth, what would you like to share with us?
Oh, what I would like to share is actually a couple of years actually before that was I was trying to grow my hair out, because in Native American culture, we like to have a long braid in the back of our hair, and we like to identify that and show it, be proud of it. But when I was coming up in the middle school in Dake, a lot of kids would make fun of me about it, and it would make me feel bad about being Native American and about my heritage and what I felt like. And it made me feel so bad that it actually made me cut my hair to make it feel like I was just normal. And looking back on it now, it makes me feel kind of not dumb, but it kind of makes me feel sad that I did that it made me get down to that low of a person that cut my hair and not really want to have anything to do with my heritage because of that. And so it's kind of tough for me, because growing up in Irondequoit, like playing lacrosse and all that, we were called the Indians and we're called that, but nobody really knew the background of it. No one understands what the true information about what being Native American is. So it was tough for me, because kids would make fun of me about being Native American. They'd be making noises at me. And then I would try to teach kids, but nobody really understands it. Instead, they would just make a joke out of it instead of trying to understand where I'm coming from about it. So it's tough, because people want us to change how we view other races, but nobody wants to get to the point of how we could change other views. And that's the thing that I struggle with, because I try to teach my friends, but nobody really understood it. So instead of me wanting to expose more people to my heritage and be proud of my heritage, instead it pushed me down and not wanting me to really show my true side of how proud I was of being Native American, and it affected me. So that's one of the toughest things for me. And another one was really the teachers don't teach anything about my heritage. We just hear one thing, that Christopher Columbus came over on a boat and took it over. But why are we called Native Americans then? We're native to America, not native from a different country. So that's another thing I struggle with, because going into one of my classes in social studies, actually a history class, I had an argument with one of my teachers because she tried to tell me that my people came from Asia. We're not from America, we're from Asia. And failed me on my test because I said that I was from America. So that's why I struggle at, is because I identify as a Native American. Yes, I'm proud of my heritage, but nobody understands my true heritage or where my people came from or our struggles that we've been going through and we're still going through. And I hope that this committee stays in the school to teach these kids that there's other races out there, and that Native Americans had a lot of great things to offer, and that we were here before many other people were here, and we could show people things that they never seen before. But that's all I have to say for right now.
Ronnie, just want to let you know that all the work that I'm doing with the cultural sensitivity and the flag raising and the Indigenous People Center and all that is because I seen what you went through and because of what I went through. And I love you.
Love you too, Dad.
Thank you, Ronnie, for sharing your experiences with us. And all of the work that you and your father have done with our district is the reason why we are here today.
Thank you.
Trish, we would love to hear from you.
Okay, Yahweh, tough acts to follow. Ronnie and Ron, Yahweh, thank you for sharing. And thank you all for having us in the work that you've done. I've been on Mother Earth here for over 60 years, and the Haudenosaunee people have been here for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, and other Indigenous people. So 10 minutes isn't a lot of time, so I've tried to be, kind of picky and choosy, and I thought that it would be best if I just kind of tried to stick to my own family, since this is our home. That right here, this is our home, and to kind of give you a little bit of a timeline and some history, because we're hearing that the education is lacking in the schools, so that would be helpful. But this is your home too, and that's why you're here tonight. And we certainly don't want to take anybody's home from them. We've had that done to us over and over and over again, and we know how it feels. It doesn't feel good. It hurts physically, it hurts emotionally, it hurts mentally, it hurts financially. And so we all know there's a huge homeless problem in the US. That's not why we're meeting here tonight, but I bring it up because it affects every aspect of your life and more than you can even imagine. And homeless people in the US are every gender, every ethnicity, including Native American. There's a lot of homeless Native American people. And that is pretty ironic if you stop and think about that. How can a Native American person be homeless here in the US? But they are in a lot of cities and that. So then you throw COVID into the mix and things get even worse. Now, the reason I bring up COVID, we're all pretty sick of it, and we all know how bad it is and everything, but then think about smallpox and measles and the flu, and the diseases that were brought over by the colonists. And one thing that you will hear about Native Americans, and you don't hear very much in history books, you don't hear very much, period, but that so many of us were wiped out from diseases. And that is true. And you'll hear that we didn't have resistance to it. And I'm sure that in part that is true too. But think about anyone when they're faced with malnutrition, when they're faced with cold, when they're faced with homelessness, when they're being moved from place to place. You don't have a lot of resistance. That's why homeless people today are so sick. So I'm trying to have people see things from a different perspective. And we weren't weak and therefore died off from diseases. There was many factors going into this in addition to the disease. And then those, unfortunately, all those negative things that happen are passed down through the generations in every respect. So why would I be dredging up so much history that's so ancient? Because it's not so ancient. And that's why I thought if I put kind of a face of my great-great-grandmother on it, then you start to kind of see things. My great-great-great-grandmother, so that's her village, was in the Finger Lakes. As we all know, a gorgeous area, beautiful area, tremendous real estate. But it wasn't so wonderful just for the views. It was tremendous farmland, hunting, fishing, fresh water. It was a beautiful place to live. And that's where my great-great-grandmother's village was until it was burnt under the order of Washington by the Clinton and Sullivan campaign, along with over 40 other Onödowága villages. And so all those people going into winter were homeless. Not that many of them were actually died by the troops, by the hands of the troops, but their homes were destroyed and all their food and stores. And so they all headed west for the most part. And many of them stopped along the Genesee and settled there, the Genesee River, where there was already villages. They joined people there. And right now in the village of Rush, there's Horseshoe Solar is trying to put up solar panels on both sides of the Genesee River, which isn't very environmental. The people of Rush aren't for this. And it's on our ancestral homeland, and probably where some of these people that were burnt out of the Finger Lakes moved to. And there's burial grounds there, but it looks like solar power is going to get the go-ahead, although there are many people trying to block that right now. And that is happening right now in present day. My particular family traveled on to where the Buffalo Creek and Niagara River come together. And many of you folks know that area, whether you know it or not. That's basically right about where the Buffalo Sabres play and where the Naval Museum is at Buffalo. And that's where we settled with a village that was already there. And then the War of 1812 came along and Buffalo was burnt by the British. So if you're keeping track, my great-great-great-grandmother's home was burnt again. And then the Erie Canal was a great thing, right? It helped commerce. Well, not so much for us because we were asked to move. The terminus of the canal became the most valuable land in the New York State at the time, what was called New York State. And so we were told to move to Tonawanda Creek. So my great-great-great-grandmother had to move yet again, and this time with my great-great-grandmother. They moved to Tonawanda. And on it goes. The Ogden Land Company bought the Tonawanda Reservation illegally, and we had a 15-year battle trying to keep our land. We ultimately did keep it by buying it back, even though the United States government said the land sale was illegal. And I'm condensing a lot and leaving out a tremendous amount, but that's just one family being moved around so many times. And actually, we're pretty lucky in the whole scheme of things, because number one, I'm still here to talk to you today. There's many Native nations that are gone, that are extinct, that their languages are gone, their art is gone. We know precious little about them. And that's really, really sad. it's very sad. And there's some that only a few people speak the language. And so the more we can learn about each other, the better we will all be. Let's see. I did write some things down because I didn't want to go too far astray. So then my great-grandmother, now we're only one grade away. In 1871, my great-grandmother Carrie was born. And when she was 5 years old, Custer was killed. And that was way out in Montana. So you would think that wouldn't have too much to do with us. But there was a fellow named Richard Pratt who was a general who fought with General Custer. And one of the jobs that General Pratt had was keeping Indian prison. And he was very good at it. And 3 years after Custer was killed, he went into the business of Carlisle Indian School. Richard Pratt opened Carlisle Indian School. Having run Indian prisons, it was perfect for him because Indian boarding school was a prison. It was a labor camp and a prison, and that's what Richard Pratt ran. And all of my great-grandmother's children were sent off to Carlisle and other Indian schools, as were probably, I'm going to guess, every panelist here has some tie to Carlisle or an Indian boarding school, either through their parent or, their grandfather, grandmother, all of the above.
Richard, excuse me, I'm sorry. You just gotta, I don't know if you're gonna bring this up. Richard Pratt was from Rochester, New York.
I did not know that. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Thank you for informing me of that.
One of Rochester's proud citizens, Richard Pratt, Rochester, New York.
I'll be darned. I did not know that. Learn something new every day. Thank you, Ron. So, gosh, there's just so much to go over. Yeah, and so his theme, which I know the panelists know this, but a lot of people haven't heard, is kill the Indian, save the man. And it was just basically take away everything about anyone, about them being Indian. And then the US government finalized that Congress in 1880 by setting up the civilization regulations. Now the civilization regulations were offenses that only Indians could commit. They outlawed most things native, religion, dancing, ceremonies, and this was actually printed so-called medicine men, and leaving the confines of the reservation without written permission. Indians could be shot if they did leave the reservation, but people often didn't ask to see the papers before opening fire. So to have a law set up outlawing basically everything that is you is pretty bad. But what's even more interesting, I think, is that I was a sophomore in college when that was essentially rescinded. 1978. It wasn't that long ago that we were given permission to believe the way, follow whatever traditional religion we wanted to. We were given permission to use our own languages again. 1978. So a lot has been done to Native Americans, Indigenous people, all across from one coast to the other. And in so doing, a lot has been done to all of our environment that we live in, to our homes. And along with those religious acts were burns that we used to do, burning the land out in California, raising oysters along the East Coast, killing as well as tending the buffalo herds. And the list goes on. And all of those things were illegal for us to do. And now, in the state we're in terms of climate change and the environment, people are turning, the Nature Conservancy, the Wildlife Federation, the state of California, all sorts of organizations are turning to Native Americans and asking, how do we do this? And in every case, Native Americans are stepping up and helping out. And so I'm saying that it's important that we learn the truth and that we learn more about each other, all of us, for the sake of humanity, but also for the sake of the environment. That it's so important that we can't look at Mother Earth and not think of her as our mother, and not think of living things as our brothers and sisters and treating them wrong. So I think that's crucial. And Ron spoke many times about erasure. 87% of high school students, high school graduates, 87% think that basically we're extinct, that Native Americans are a thing of the past, that they are no more. So there's something horrendously wrong with the curriculum and with our education system, because we are still here. And not only are we still here, but we have given a tremendous amount over the years. Historically, I mean, corn is the #1 product grown around the world for everything. We put it in our cars. We make plastics out of it. They do everything with corn these days. Corn came from South America, and there was no wall, so it came up here and all the way up into Canada. And so historically, Native Americans have contributed a tremendous amount to around the world. Coffee, cocoa, you name it. You couldn't imagine tomatoes. Everybody thinks of tomatoes in Italian and potatoes in Ireland, Native American. So we've contributed a lot in the past, but we contribute now, from science and astronauts to authors and artists and all across the board. And unfortunately, we don't hear enough about that. And it would be wonderful if we did, for everyone's sake. So that's about what I have to say, is we have to treat Mother Nature like home, and we have to treat each other better. And I think that everyone here is happy to share more information, to educate people all they want. Now,
Thank you, Trish, so much. Okay, Catherine, you're up.
Okay, Seguli, that's one of the few words that I know in Oneida. As it was mentioned, I grew up outside of Syracuse, New York. And most people look at me and don't think I am Indigenous at all. When you look at my mom, she definitely has more of the physical traits, and people often ask her where she's from, and she'll reply New York. But really they're asking, what country did she come from, not thinking she's, American. But obviously she's definitely American. One other thing is that when people do find out usually that I'm Indigenous, for whatever reasons, I typically feel like I have to justify or explain, how I know I'm Indigenous, since I don't look like it, or what tribe I'm from, or what clan I'm from. But yeah, if I tell someone I'm German, I don't also feel like I have to justify that I'm German to them. But it's just something, and it's just with me, but other people as well, who maybe look more like I do. There's definitely a big veil of invisibility with the Indigenous, as we've all been talking about tonight. First, we're not always physically recognized, because we're not all, don't all look the same. There's lots of different physical traits when people are Indigenous. We have many, many different nations and tribes throughout the United States and around the world. The second is definitely the education and the textbooks. I've taught 4th grade for many years, teaching 6th grade now, but 4th grade, part of New York State curriculum is New York State and the history of New York State. And there's a very small section in the textbooks. In the first year, I went to teach, our Native American unit, talk about the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee, and just kind of dismayed to see the section that was in our textbook that we had. Luckily, we had other resources, and I kind of took stuff from my own home, obviously, and own personal experience to share. And my colleagues are really open to learning more, and will come and ask me for questions. A lot of times, though, definitely the textbooks refer to, like, in the past, as we've mentioned, that we're all dead. And so the first questions I'll ask, my 4th graders is, who do they know that's Indigenous? And, maybe one person raises their hand because they're not exactly sure what the word means yet. And then by the end, I start showing pictures of my family, and they start to make the connection, like, oh, wait a second. wait, how can you be? And it's kind of fun to see that eye-opening awakening in them to kind of realize, that we're still here, that we're still alive, and we're still existing and doing all kinds of things. We teach the 13 colonies. So why don't we teach about all the different indigenous groups that were here on that land before the colonists came from Europe? Lots of tweaks we could do to our education, definitely, to make it more prevalent and make people more aware. I had students this year who were talking about the Columbus Day versus Indigenous Day, and when they were finding out everything as we're unfolding and looking at different resources, a couple of my kids were really upset. Like, how could my parents tell me this? I'm like, well, you can't be upset with your parents if that's what they were taught. He said, but you can go home and teach them. You can show them these other things. So, I mean, I see the positive. There's definitely, a way to go. But I enjoy teaching in that sense because I can see the change that some kids are taking away with them, and kind of looking. My mom grew up in a small town outside of Wisconsin, Kaukauna, Wisconsin, near the reservation in Oneida, but not on the reservation. At that time, there's a lot of discrimination. People didn't really want to acknowledge that they were Native American, although she physically, obviously, her whole family was Indigenous. They never really talked about it. It was never really acknowledged or vocalized in the house. She remembers her cousins talking about who was prettier, and it had to do with who was lighter skinned. That was kind of the ingrained idea of what, pretty and beautiful look like. She's got different stories of being looked at or told different things. You're nothing but an Indian. And that definitely, I think, affected her view of herself for quite a while. A lot of people thought, Indigenous people are all drunks. They just belong, they want to work, especially if they're on the reservation, all these misconceptions about them. My mom's grandmother lived in the house with them growing up for the last maybe 10 years of her life. And she also never spoke or shared anything about her culture or her language, the history. And years later, my mom and I have been doing more research and uncovering, parts of our history, and discovered that she had been sent to Carlisle, along with 4 or 5 of her siblings. My great-great-grandfather, whom she married, had also been at Carlisle, as well as Haskell Institute. And so that kind of explains a lot as to why she never shared anything of her past, of her culture, of her language. And my grandmother, my mom, didn't know anything to pass on to us as well. This past summer, my mom and I made a trip to Carlisle. We've passed it numerous times, traveling up and down. I know there's been several remains that returned to Oneida, Wisconsin. And we just wanted to go. We've, passed it many times. So it was hard to explain the feeling of going there and knowing that history and knowing that that's where my great-great-grandmother had been. She survived. Her and her siblings all made it home, although one sibling did pass away shortly after returning home. So we have, no idea why, but many children didn't make it back from Carlisle or these other boarding schools, and many of their remains are still at the schools. So it definitely explains, though, why there's this big gap in our history of some people who don't know everything about their past and their history and the culture. So it's sad, but that's why I'm kind of doing as much as I can to, and my mom, to relearn it, to find things out, because as Trish mentioned, Pratt's goal was to erase anything Native American. So try to make a point of not letting him erase what he wanted to. What else I was going to mention? Again, teaching 4th grade, I re-emphasize with my kids why we study the past. We don't make those same mistakes, in the future, so we can recognize and just appreciate all of us. I really try to make a point of for my sons to learn what they can about the culture as well. We've gone back and forth to Wisconsin. Growing up yearly, my family would go to Wisconsin for the powwows. We always had a 4th of July powwow and visit our family and friends on the reservation, off the reservation. But doing so, I always kind of felt like an outsider also, because I don't look as Native American as some of my family and friends out there. So It's kind of a strange feeling of where you belong and where you don't belong. And then if I tell my friends here or my other family knows I'm Indigenous, they expect I'm going to know everything about every Native American culture somehow just because, you know, part of myself is Indigenous. So it's a strange in between, but that's the story that I have. Again, we really want our kids to be critical thinkers in schools too. So I think really questioning the resources that they have, you know, thinking about, you know, every one of my students saying, well, how come there's not more in this book about the different nations and things like that? And, you know, it goes back to, I mean, it's a good critical reading skill. We want them to be critical readers. Well, who wrote the textbook? You know, why do you think maybe they wouldn't have included this in there? And they, again, have those little light bulb moments, you know, and like, oh, okay. So again, just the education, I think we still working on it, but there's a ways to go. But I love the fact that my sons have gone to a powwow and know what a little bit of what their culture is. Not as much as I'd like them to, but it's a work in progress. And again, just like the idea that many people think, and the students start off with thinking of all the older pictures of Native Americans, all the black and white from the past. I like to show them modern day pictures of when we've gone to the tribes, when we've gone to the powwows, when we've gone to see the different exhibits and things like that, and to bring it to their attention that we have musicians today, we have authors today, we have poets today, we have scientists today, we have our Secretary of the Interior, you know, just kind of bring that to their attention. It makes it more real for them. I guess the last message I wanted to just kind of leave is that we have many people living in the United States that are Indigenous, in New York, in Rochester, in Irondequoit, and some of them look not as Indigenous as others. And so you never really know who is and who isn't, and just to kind of be open to all different forms and different groups of Indigenous people that we have. That's it.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, so now we're going to go to Ansley. And I just wanted to remind our guests and other panelists, I mean, you can talk among each other, but also guests, please feel free to put any questions in our Q&A so we can address them for you. Thank you.
First and foremost, I want to acknowledge, you know, the speakers that went before me. You know, you all shared rich information, personal accounts, difficult conversations, challenging moments throughout your lives. And I just want to say that, you know, really, you know, you are the resistance. You know, Ronnie doing that opening today was important, you know, for us to get to that place, you know, where we first acknowledge and go through our protocols and maintain who we are as a people. You know, he is the resistance, you know, because he had family members, he had people in his community that were abused, that were, you know, had their mouths washed out with soap, had their hair cut off, as 3- and 4-year-old children, taken away from their families. I've been to Carlisle. I was asked to go down and speak to Dickinson College one time about the game of lacrosse and the deeper meanings. And lacrosse is an Indigenous sport. And sport and food tend to kind of be those connecting points where people can kind of all come together around and really kind of, you know, put down some differences, I guess, at times. And, you know, at least kind of respect one another, you know, for their prowess or their abilities, I guess, and things like that. And, you know, Irondequoit High School has a proud lacrosse tradition. You know, I think growing up in the area, having gone to Ganondagan, I think in the 4 years that I was there, I don't think we ever beat Irondequoit, and they had a pretty good record against us. And it was always difficult, you know, to go up and, you know, go and compete in that town, you know, but it was also something I could respect, and I appreciated the tradition. I appreciated the way that they played the game. Excuse me. The name thing, you know, has come up a number of different times, and you know, how do we get around that sort of thing? You know, and I look at it and I realize that the term Indian is a federal, you know, law. It's part of federal Indian law, and it's a legal term, I guess, in a way. But I would challenge the teams or to challenge the people who have these mascots to actually maybe honor the people that Indian people are really from, the people of India, and see what that sort of looks like. See what that mascot that they can come up with to honor those people. That'd be one of my challenges to them. Now, I know that Irondequoit High School and the Central School District has done the work, done the very challenging work to change that mascot and to try to be on the right side of history and where we are today. So I appreciate the work that's being done. I appreciate the work of this committee that's come together to invite us all here to share these stories with you all. It's a starting point. It's a conversation starter, really is what it is. And how do we make those inroads? I think that Catherine's doing that work. She's doing the difficult work. I think Ronnie's doing that difficult work of trying to educate. I know that, Trish is doing that work as well, working with young people and visibility, us being in these places, oftentimes education was weaponized against us. Why does a school have a cemetery outside of it? That's not a real thing, is it? I mean, and it very much is. Having gone down to Carlisle and looking at that little cemetery that sits outside the military barracks today, and looking at the age of these children and thinking that a 3-year-old child was put onto a train from Alaska who probably didn't speak English and was carted by train all the way down to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And he didn't survive that trip. And, they buried that child there. And that child's parents probably have no idea what happened, what that child experienced in that time. So when people want to talk about, just get over it, this is within, a few lifetimes, not even that long back. Children were experiencing this. People in our communities were experiencing this. My family is from the Allegheny territory of Western New York, down around Salamanca, New York. And, people may look at us today and say, oh, well, they're prosperous. They're doing different things. They have casinos. They have this and that, but we cannot get back the land that was flooded out by the Kinzua Dam. My mother came home from school and saw her mother standing on the porch telling her to gather up all the things that they could get into a bag because the Army Corps of Engineers was going to come through and burn their house. And she got to stand there and watch the Army Corps of Engineers burn her house down right in front of her. And so when she became, later on in life, experiencing all the different challenges and things like that, psychological issues and things like that, alcoholism, a lot of these can be attributed to those intergenerational traumas of seeing those sort of things. And me as a young boy, not having grown up with my mother and having been moved around a little bit, living with my aunts and my uncles and things like that, because my mother just couldn't handle it at different times because of the atrocities that she had seen and experienced. These are very real things. So, when people want to say, just get over it, work through it, toughen up, whatever that is. I know that all the people that have come to this country have had their challenges, faced their challenges and things like that. But the way that the Indigenous people had to endure and what they had to experience and the erasure that's happened along the way, I mean, this is something that's too much, And so now is the time, after the George Floyd thing, after the Me Too movement, all of a sudden the people who are underrepresented now have a voice, have a space. That paradigm shift is starting to happen. So I applaud the people that are here, that have come here this evening, the people who are in the audience and listening to this. I hope that you do a deeper dive. It doesn't take too long to kind of dig in a little bit and find out a little bit more about the reality. It's not about critical race theory. So don't be afraid of that boogeyman. This is something, it's people. This is something that people are putting out there to make you hate each other, to be afraid of one another. And now add into COVID, where now all of a sudden we've been isolated and separated. This has been a horrible thing for a lot of different people. And a lot of people have suffered because of these things. And it's the policies that you've all been fed and lied to over the years. So really what critical race theory is doing is opening up the truths, telling you the truths that were being lied about, the things that Catherine was talking about, the things that Trish were talking about, the lived experience of Ronnie and his son. Those are the realities. Those are the real things that are happening. That was the stories that we grew up hearing when our generation before us, when Ronnie's speaking his language. That's a beautiful thing to see and to hear. He is the resistance. He hasn't given that up. And to choose this Indigenous identity is a very difficult thing because there's a lot of places we're not visible and we're not a part of that. So presence can be protest, us being here, standing up and talking. And I'm sorry that, Ronnie Jr. had to experience what he had to experience. I've been there. I've been in those places, being the only, sometimes sitting in the back of the room. And all of a sudden you start talking about Indigenous stories or Indigenous history and things like that. And the whole room turns around and looks at you. And you're just standing there like, I'm just a guy, I'm just a kid, didn't really have all the answers at that time. But I made a point of making sure that I did have those answers later on in life. And I'm making sure that I can pass those answers on to other children, other young people, and to other brothers and sisters that are out there, just to get them to understand and see people as humans and to understand one another. Our message of peace is what saved us as a people. The, formation of the Confederacy and what we came together as under this message of peace. It was a very difficult thing for it to happen, for us to come to that place, but it's a beautiful thing that came to happen. And if you look at that flag that Ronnie was generous in donating to you, at the ends, there's a couple of lines that stick out down the end. And that's an invitation for anybody that comes under that message of peace, who wants to come under that message of peace, under that good mind. You have that ability to come in, and we can put you through the process. We can go through a protocol, an edge of the woods, and wipe away the tears for you. Clean out your ears so that you can hear better. Clear your throat so you can speak clearly. We're happy to do that for you and welcome you into the original territory of the Haudenosaunee people. We're still very a proud people. We're doing the best that we can. It's challenging at times to be and have this identity, but for those of us who do, and those of us that are doing this work, we need to support one another and have each other's back as much as we can. And we also have to lean on our new neighbors, the people that are here, and also remind them of their responsibility to the treaties that they signed, to remind them of what it is to be a guest in other people's territory, in other people's land. And there's a way to conduct yourself and a way to handle yourself and a way to move throughout the world. And really what that is to move with the earth, move with your mother. Take your shoes off once in a while and go walk outside, connect to your mother. You're so caught driving around from Starbucks to Starbucks, all caffeinated and sitting in traffic someplace on 390, hating the world. Take your shoes off and walk outside. See what happens. See how much better you feel about yourself. See how much better you feel about your family and your people around you. And think about what they've gotten you to buy into. Paying taxes, mortgages. This isn't a lived experience. You're owned. You got to believe it. So think about these things when the elections come up again, and think about the type of leaders that you really want to stand up. In our communities, anybody that's a Hoyani or a chief or a sachem, they run from that because it's a lifetime of servitude, where we have people here that get elected based on a popularity contest, and they want to run out there and wave the flag like they have all the answers. And we've seen all these challenges and the issues that they've brought throughout the world. American exceptionalism is sort of a really tough pill to swallow when you see them drop a bomb on Hiroshima and decimate 70,000 people in the blink of an eye. That's not American exceptionalism, that's brutality. That's not a good way to be. So we have to think about the history and the horrors that this country has inflicted upon all people throughout the world, where they've had this damage, where they've done these things, where they're playing people against one another, what they're doing out there. We could all do better. And by listening to the Indigenous people and talking to them and including them in the conversation, there may be a better way for us to all kind of save one another and find the goodness in one another and help each other through this. We need to develop the empathy for one another. Understand that we all have a message and we all have something to contribute. That's what's beautiful about this place, the difference. So with that, I'm going to, turn it back over to Courtney, I guess. But I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. And, more than anything, I just want to really give a huge, Goa to the people, a big thank you to the people who gone before me here and provided me this opportunity to be a part of this. So, Yahweh.
Thank you, Ansley. So I think that this has been an amazing panel discussion for all of us listening in, and I think for each other as panelists too. I think that, Ansley, you were starting to approach some good advice for us on the call as allies. And I'm wondering if any or all of you have some advice or some parting words for us that are allies, things we can do, or things that you would like to leave us with, which I see Ron has.
Well, one of the things that came up for me when Ansley was speaking in was, and since we're talking, this is educational, and that when we're educating about Indigenous people and in 4th grade, the expectation sometimes is for Native people to know to be an expert on the subject matter expert. When the education system actually was designed for hundreds of years to make sure that they did not know anything about their culture. And then to expect a student to put them on the spot, which happens quite regularly, and it happened to me, but I happened to know what my culture was, and I actually taught a lesson in the class, and they were putting out bad information. So I spoke to some people, and I had the curriculum changed in 4th grade. But to expect everybody to be a subject matter expert when the system was designed to make sure that they didn't know, sometimes the educators really put an expectation on students, and it can be really embarrassing for a student, so if they find a student in their class, it's like an Indigenous student, to ask them to teach a lesson or something like that, that's really isn't something that should be done. You get that done talk to them beforehand on that, but I've seen it done, and it's really embarrassing for people sometimes.
Thank you, Ron. That's very good insight. Does anyone else have any advice for allies or teachers coming from an educational standpoint? We do have a question in the chat, actually, from our Director of Humanities, actually, to the panel. Oh. Do you want me to go ahead with the question, Ansley, or are you going to give it?
Yeah, go ahead. I can. So there's a book that was out by a cousin of mine, John Mohawk. It's called Thinking an Indian. And John Mohawk was an amazing philosopher. He was a historian. He understood the language. He did a lot of really wonderful, amazing things in his time, and he passed far too soon. But he had a lot of really great teachings and a lot of great thoughts as far as like what are ways that people could kind of take a step back and think about the bigger picture and what it is that we're doing to our mother, the earth, and what are the teachings, what are the things around this. Really kind of taking a deeper dive in messages and things like that, and wondering like, well, what are the young people going to think? And what are the people that once we're gone, what are they all going to think? And we have that concept of this, the generations that are unborn, of the faces that are unborn. And it's a responsibility of ours as people that none of this is ours. We're just borrowing it for the time that we're here. And we want to make sure that there's something here for the others, the faces unborn, to enjoy and to appreciate. And what is it for us to leave this place, savaged the way that it is, the pollution and things like that. When I moved back up here, I'd been living down in Ithaca, and you're pretty inundated with liberal media down there. And so I had to come back up here and kind of figure out what are these people talking about, all these other right wingers and stuff like that. So I started to listen to and be deliberate about listening to Sean Hannity and these other, people, just to kind of hear what their messaging is and what is it that they're being told and what are they broadcasting out there. And, it's this fear mongering, and it's this real kind of confusion. But it's still this drive for capitalism, and capitalism is going to get us someplace where we're not going to be able to drink the water anymore. We're not going to have the things that we need to sustain us. What Ronnie had given there in that opening, that Ganondagan there, was an acknowledgement and a thank you and an appreciation for all of the things that have been provided for us to support ourselves and to sustain us. It wasn't a prayer. It was an acknowledgement. It was an appreciation. for the things that they're doing. They're upholding their responsibilities. They're doing the things that they're doing. The next thing we're going to see is the strawberries. That's a big medicine for us, that it uplifts our spirits as people. And that's what's going to happen. And we're going to acknowledge these things. And as we sit here and we continue to do what Ronnie did beforehand, and we start to see these things start to fade away, that's when it's going to be a real sign that our mother, the earth, is going through a major change, and that some of these things aren't going to be here for the ones that are unborn yet. So we have a responsibility as people, and we have this ability to make these changes. The shirt that I'm wearing tonight, it's a shirt that I wore to Israel when I was the executive director of the Iroquois Nationals. And we were going there to play the medicine game, the game of lacrosse. And what this represents, it's a wampum belt, and it's the dish with one spoon. And what it represents is a dish that we can all eat from. And we're going to eat from there with a spoon so as to not to hurt the other people, and take what we need, but leave enough for the rest. And the reason why I wore this in Israel is because you have the homeland of 3 major religions coming together in this conflict zone. And so here was an indigenous team playing the creator's game, being played by all these other nations. And we were the ones that came with a message. We came with this message of peace. We're there to heal. And we were told by our communities that we shouldn't go there because it was a war zone. And there was a lot of terrible things that had happened there. But part of our history and part of our stories were about a man that came across Lake Ontario in a stone canoe. And when he got here, he said, "Look what they did to me over there." And he had holes in his hands. And so that being part of the story, we were standing there along the whaling wall, and I was with one of my other, one of my players, and he stopped and he was looking and he said, "This is where he came from. This is where that man was. He was over here first before he came to us." And that message that he brought was a message of peace. And so that's what we're standing for. That's what we're here for. That's what we're upset about. We're not savages, even though the Declaration of Independence says that. Read the Declaration of Independence someday. What's it say about us? Merciless Indian savages. That's how we're referred. So this is in your history. We're a part of your history. The democracy that you understand and you appreciate today, that ideal came from here. And the thing that you left out were the women. It's a patriarchy that we're living in. And the balance that you need in life is what we're talking about. We're not talking about good and evil. We're talking about balance and that in-between space where we can all live and conduct ourselves as humans. Onödowága, the original people. That's what we refer to ourselves as. So with that, I will be quiet, but for the director of the humanities panel, or the person there who was asking, I would look for the Thinking in Indian by John Mohawk. The other one would be Tom Porter and Grandma Said. That's a great book to read. He's an amazing cultural worker, I guess. I got time to sit with him the other night. He was up here in Rochester and I got to spend some time with him. There it is. That's a great book to read and great book to understand. So they'll give you some answers and a little bit more insight into who we are as people.
Sure. Yeah, hold it up more, Ronnie. There you go.
Ronnie, say something so the camera will go on you, young man, please.
Ronnie.
Here we go.
Yeah, this is the book right here. And Grandma Said, it is a very good book, actually. I started reading it.
It was holding up his or the end of his bed at one point. He was trying to keep it from wobbling, but he found it. So he knew where it was at least.
Actually there was I had something from Cornell University. They had written up a curriculum and about the Haudenosaunee. Did you run into that, Ansley? That's something that I forwarded to Kim Crystal, and I gave Ronnie and his girlfriend, and they were some staff members, and it's a pretty good thing. I looked over it, and it came out of Cornell.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of great writers that were there before me. The Aguego Press was far and above and ahead of its time. Jose Guerrero, who was the editor of the John Mohawk book, was the editor of the Aguego Press. They were talking about contemporary Indigenous stories back then. And I mean, to go back and read some of those things today, it's amazing, because we had so many knowledge keepers and wisdom keepers that were together at that time. And people were able to do that work. And this was amazing that this was pre-internet and pre, cell phone and stuff like that. And people were actually able to go and spend the time and ask these questions and sit with these people.
Right. And here, this was written up in the 70s, and it was typed on a typewriter. And they were having the same conversation that we are having right now. And they were having that conversation 40 years ago about how there needs to be curriculum change, and we need to make it less Eurocentric, and we need to include Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous wisdom keepers in the curriculum to ensure that this history is not lost. And this was happening 40 years ago. And here we are having the same conversation, saying that there's movement has been made. And, I don't know,
a lot of that,
they were saying that 40 years ago.
that work, Ronnie, was actually suppressed by some non-native faculty members that felt that it wasn't really 100% accurate at the time, and they didn't feel that it was something that fully represented. But of course, the information came out later that it was, and that, of course, being the male patriarchal, system that education is, they were able to suppress that information, and they were able to kind of bury that stuff. So there's no wonder that we're still spinning our wheels here. And, it just kind of stands to the reason that, I think we have to continue to tell our story on our own terms. We have to have those opportunities. Shameless plug, the Original People's podcast that I do. It's on Spotify. Don't hiss and be mad at me because of Joe Rogan. I didn't say the stuff that he said. But I'm also on Apple Podcasts. So if you look up Original People's Podcast, we're there. It's a microphone with a Seneca, the one feather up for the Seneca people. Shameless plug again. Sorry. But it's informative, and I feel very fortunate to have the guests that I've had so far. I want to value their story and value their time, and I want to make sure that I don't do much editing. I don't edit these things ever, really. We try to do it in one take, and I don't really do a lot of preparation beforehand, which hasn't really bit me in the butt too much yet so far. But I want it to be an organic conversation. I want to be able to have that person shine through in their voice and in their language. And really kind of, have that real conversation to remind people of the contributions of Indigenous people, both historically and presently, and that we're still here and that we're still very much a part of the conversation. And we may, move through spaces, under the radar. We may not be as visible as you may want us to be, but we're also still here, and we're still taking, tabs on what's being said and paying attention to what's going on around us. And we're seeing the signs, and we're seeing that this place is in a lot of trouble right now. And our connection to the land, our connection to our culture is what informs that. And so by us paying attention, by us having elders that have told us to make sure we're paying attention, we're seeing this stuff come true.
I was just going to mention some other books. One author that I've used when I was teaching fourth grade, Joseph Bruac. One of his books was Children of the Longhouse, and that was actually, we've used that for a very long time in our building. It goes to the story of lacrosse. It goes back and forth, teaching a lot about the culture too, very subtle. So historical fiction books for some of the younger kids, elementary, middle school age. He's got some other ones. He's got quite a few, actually. One I just read came out a couple of years ago, Two Roads, which touches on the residential schools also, and Code Talkers. He's got quite a few books, but he's been a pretty good author.
That wasn't Bruchac that you were talking about, was
Oh, yeah.
it?
Yeah, sorry.
I would be careful about recommending his books.
Okay.
Just an FYI.
Okay.
You can do a little more research yourself and kind of get into that, but there's some questions around some of the things he's doing. But
okay.
There are plenty of other Indigenous artists and storytellers that are out there that are still people you should definitely be looking out for.
Since we're doing shameless plugs, I think I'll do mine. Three Feathers Up. That's my Mohawk. My plug for Mohawk. We got three feathers on our Gustoa, and just spreading some education. I'm the director of the Indigenous People Center here in Rochester. We're located we do our events, and that's out of the Flying Squirrel over in Cornhill. In July 9th and 10th during the Cornhill Festival, we're going to be having Indigenous artists and crafts set up in the parking lot of the Flying Squirrel. It's a free event for Indigenous people. You guys all know the Cornhill Festival draws like over 100,000 people a weekend. So it's a free event. to promote artists and crafters, which is what the Indigenous People Center is for. We promote Indigenous people and anything whatever is going on and whatever they're doing, and that's what it's for. So hopefully you guys can stop by and support it. That'd be very nice.
Thank you, Ron, for sharing that. And thank you, Ansley, for sharing details about your podcast. And of course, I'm sure folks can see you at Ganondagan. And Trish, did you want to leave us with any parting words?
I'm embarrassed to say there's a really good book called The Inconvenient Indian, and it's a Canadian author whose name escapes me at the moment. So if anybody else knows, speak up. But I do have quite a bibliography that I can provide for you that I'm happy to share. And the only thing that I'd like to close with is to say that if everyone just was a little bit more grateful for what you already have, it would be a better world, because we really need less stuff, and then that's better for the environment. And this seems very simple, but I can't leave without giving a plug for the native pollinators that we need so desperately. And that is, don't use any chemicals in your yard. Please, if you are, stop and leave some leaves. Like, you know, don't rake everything up, leave some sticks, leave some leaves. They're little tiny guys. They do so much work. We need them so bad. I'm not talking about the European honeybee. I love honey, but the European bees are colonizers here, and that's cool. But our native bees, we really have to protect them at this point. And so please don't use pesticides, and please leave some wild areas and wild flowers around your yard for them. Don't clean everything up.
Yeah, in the Mohawk language, and I'm not sure about the Suntan, but the literal translation for pollinators in our language is the ones that make the world beautiful.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I know
You're a
Ron,
pollinator, Ron.
Ronnie, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to say.
What you saying? I hear you.
I said you're a pollinator.
Oh, yeah.
Aw.
Well, there he is, right there. It is.
Okay, I guess your dad said it for you, Ronnie.
Be a model too, just so you guys know.
Anything
That's
else?
part of our
Ron?
culture. Playful bantering and shame, playful bantering, that's part of our culture. Since we're teaching.
Awesome. Okay, so thank you out to all of our panelists. Aaron has turned on his camera, so I will turn things over to Aaron to give us a nice closing, but I can't thank you all enough for being here and for spending this time with us. I know that my heart is full, and I have a lot to think about, and I hope that all of our guests feel the same. So with that, I will turn the program over to Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Thanks for facilitating that. Whoops, there we go, volume. Thank you, Courtney, and thanks for facilitating that. Again, I'd be happy the district and Board of Education. I just want to really thank our panelists for giving your time to us to help in our development and our learning, because we recognize that as a community, as individuals, we need to continue that and to elevate your voices to combat, like we said in the beginning, that erasure that has happened over time. I do want to just correct one faux pas that I made. I, once again, missed a subcommittee member when I introduced the group in the beginning. So Catherine, very sorry about that. The flag raising, I missed somebody as well. But again, just thank everybody for being here. And we look forward to more conversations and dialogue. Thank you. Everyone have a great night.
Now,
Thank you, everyone.
Onödowága.
Nawa.
No, I.